Welcome to the first episode this week of the Fenway Rundown. I'm Sean McAdam. My usual co-host, Chris Cotillo, is on vacation this week, but we are joined by MassLive's Lauren Campbell, who does so much behind the scenes with our podcasts and writing and everything else, and we're happy to have her. And Lauren's going to help us out on this mailbag edition of the Fenway Rundown, getting to your questions, which you were kind enough to send in over the last 48 hours or so. We appreciate all those who do so. And if you would like to be part of the Red Sox Insider Text program from where we get our questions on these mailbag episodes, it's very simple to do. All you have to do is text the word join to 617-751-6257. Then click the link to subscribe. That will give you a free 14-day trial period to check everything out, all the breaking news, the lineups, the ability to ask questions of myself, Chris Smith, or Chris Cotillo, and to provide questions for these mailbag episodes. After that 14-day trial period, you will then be charged $4.99 per month. So welcome to our mailbag episode, and thanks to Lauren Campbell for joining us. Lauren, how are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for asking me to fill in. I'm happy to
Well,
be here.
we love having you, and let's, without further ado, get into that mailbag and tackle some questions.
Yeah, so the first one is from Joseph, and it's stemming from last night. He said, "What's up with Devers' unthoughtful attitude with the media and his lack of hustle running out ground balls?"
Yeah, let's take the first one there, Joseph. Devers has, I think, by virtue of the fact that he is both the Red Sox best player and their highest paid player, I think some responsibilities come with that. And some of those include talking to the media, including at times when you don't want to do so. And it's understanding that Devers is frustrated by what's been going on of late. The Red Sox are in a slump that has had them go 1-4 on this road trip so far. They have drifted further out of contention in the American League wildcard chase. And Devers, who is battling some shoulder woes and is slumping at the plate, is no doubt doubly frustrated by all of that. But there is, I believe, and I think a lot of people join me in this, a responsibility, excuse me, on his behalf to serve as something as the team spokesman. And there are a lot of guys in there after tough losses who maybe don't feel like answering questions for 3 or 4 minutes, but that's kind of part of the gig. And it's especially so when you are kind of the face of the franchise, as Rafael Devers is. He's got the biggest contract in team history. He is their most accomplished player. And with that, as I said, comes some responsibility to address some team-wide issues. If he doesn't do it, someone else has to. And it's important that Devers step forward, even when he doesn't particularly feel like talking after a tough loss, and take on some of those responsibilities that come with being who he is. As far as the hustle, I'm afraid that's not limited to Rafael Devers or other players on the Red Sox. It has now become, if not commonplace, then hardly uncommon for players to not always run out ground balls. And I think managers like Alex Cora, for the most part, decide that they have to pick their battles when it comes to criticizing or saying something about lack of effort. I would say for the most part, Devers plays hard. Maybe the frustration got to him a little bit on Tuesday night, and it was particularly glaring on a couple of balls that he didn't run hard to first. Unfortunate, and perhaps doubly unfortunate that it's not limited to a handful of players.
Sticking with Devers, Thomas wants to know that with the playoffs are kind of far-fetched at this point, why isn't Rafael Devers shut down? And you just mentioned his shoulder woes.
Yeah, well, he did get a few days off earlier on at the end of the last homestand. The hope was that for sitting for 3 games, that the shoulder would feel a little better. It hasn't worked out that way earlier in the year when the shoulder problems first manifested themselves. He was given some time off, and it seemed like that helped him. This time it hasn't, since he's come back both in Detroit and the ongoing series with the Mets in New York. He remains in a slump, and the Red Sox could dearly use some of that production, but it may well be that the grind of having played 120 or so games at this point, as we get into the final few weeks of the season, have taken their toll enough so that a few days rest is not enough for Devers' shoulder to feel better, and thus we're not seeing that improved production despite the time off.
And you mentioned Devers as one of the leaders and kind of the faces of this Red Sox team. And Peter's asking, who is or are the leader or leaders among the Red Sox players?
Well, I think Devers is to a certain degree, Peter, though not in a traditional vocal sense. I think Devers is one of those guys who, you've heard this expression before, leads by example. For the most part, he plays through injuries. He plays hard. He works at getting better. And I think most of us would agree that his play at third base has improved this year, and he deserves credit for that. So he kind of leads by example, though not in a vocal way. I think some other guys on that team, Rob Refsnyder, by virtue of his service time and his personality, has emerged as a guy in that clubhouse who's a little bit more of a leader this year. And certainly, though he has been gone for much of the year and unable to play, Trevor Story, as one of the veterans, a guy now 30 years old who's accomplished a lot in this game. He too is a veteran guy, and perhaps more than Devers and even Refsnyder might be a little more vocal about it. We saw that Story took it upon himself to kind of hold that infielder mini camp near his home in Texas in January to try to get some of the younger players together, create a little team bonding before spring training. And I think he would have been the de facto leader had he not been injured in the first week of the season. He'll probably be back at some point over the next week or so, but it's awfully late, and his impact, both as a leader and a player, may be somewhat minimal.
And this one is from Frank. He said, with the Red Sox now apparently crumbling during the second half of the season, similar to the past three, is it just me, or is perhaps Alex Cora's managing style not as positive a factor as is often portrayed by many involved in the various infrastructure of baseball?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It is a disturbing pattern that has happened in the last 3 years now, that the Red Sox have kind of gone into this nosedive, and you can pick the demarcation that you choose. Is it immediately after the All-Star break? Is it immediately after the trade deadline? Is it September 1st? However you're measuring it, the Red Sox have seen their play drop off now 3 years in a row. And whether that's Cora's fault or whether his tactics are only a portion of the reason that they've struggled, I think some things have to be re-examined, because when it's happened as often as it has now, 3 years in a row, I think you have to look at everything. Excuse me. And is some of this the way that Cora managers, the way that he leads, what he expects from people? But it is a recurring pattern, and it's something that has to be addressed. They have to do a lot of introspection, I think, after this season, and certainly the second half drop off that has now become almost an annual event is one of the things they have to look at.
And looking toward this offseason and into the future, this one does not have a name on it, but they want to know which of this year's bullpen arms are under consideration for next year's pitching staff.
Yeah, good question, because the bullpen has certainly failed them in a big way. I think I saw that the ERA was over 6 for the bullpen collectively since the All-Star break. It is literally the worst, i.e. highest in baseball in that stretch, and that too has become something of a second half issue the last few years. So the back end guys, the veterans, closer Kenley Jansen and the eighth inning setup guy Chris Martin, are both eligible for free agency after the season. I would be very surprised if Jansen returned next year. I think he's made it clear that as he gets toward the end of his career, he feels an attachment to the Dodgers, the team for whom he played for so long before leaving a few years ago for a year in Atlanta and then the last 2 in Boston. So I could see him seeking out other options as a free agent this winter. I think it's more likely that Martin could return despite his advanced age and despite blowing up in the eighth inning last night. Martin has pitched very well. The issue has been more injuries as he's had a few IL stints, but when he's been healthy, he's still very effective. He likes it here. I could certainly see the Red Sox bringing him back. And then the rest of it, excuse me, I think that a lot of these guys are going to have to earn spots next year, whether we're talking about Zach Kelly, whether we're talking about Josh Winkowski or Brennan Bernardino, or some of the lefties that they've run through, Cam Boozer, Bailey Horn. There's a lot there, but they have not performed well in the second half. And I think a lot of these guys are going to be competing for jobs. And I would expect the Red Sox are going to either make trades or sign some free agents or both in the bullpen to make that competition even more intense next spring training.
And sticking with the pitching, just moving over to the starting rotation now. Chris wants to know if you see Boston going after any front-end starters this offseason, and if so, what does that look like? Who could they target?
Well, it is a pretty interesting free agent class led by Corbin Burnes, who is now with the Orioles, having been traded before spring training from Milwaukee there. Burnes has been very good. He's been a durable guy throughout his career, and he clearly is going to get something well in excess of $200 million, probably for 7 or 8 years. I don't know that it's going to be a Garrett Cole-sized contract, but it's going to be a pricey one. And frankly, I don't see the Red Sox being big bidders for pitchers in free agency. We know that John Henry, over the years, has been reluctant to commit to long-term free agent deals to pitchers in their 30s because of the risk of injury. And in recent years, the number of Tommy John surgeries, it's almost as if every quality starter in the last couple of years has been sidelined by some elbow issue or undergone Tommy John surgery. So I think that if Henry was once suspect when it came to signing veteran free agents, that's even more the case now. But I can see the Red Sox and Craig Breslow making an effort to go out and identify a younger starting pitcher. Someone like, if you take a look at Skubal with the Detroit Tigers, try to find that guy. Now, that obviously is easier said than done, but you're looking for a 25 or 26-year-old guy who maybe hasn't broken through and established himself as a clear number one. The Red Sox do have a lot of trade pieces. Let's put it out there with the big three, maybe now big four, if you throw Christian Campbell in there. Those 4 elite prospects, all ranked in the top 40 prospects in all of baseball by Baseball America and other evaluators. They can't all play. It's a crowded middle infield. It's a crowded outfield with Duran, with Rafaela, with Abreu. There are a lot of options there. So I would expect that the Red Sox will indeed target elite starting pitching, but I think it's far more likely they do so via trade than rather a big name in free agency.
And a lot of questions about kind of next year and what the lineup and the roster will look like. Noah is wondering who you would like to see fill the DH role next year, assuming that Yoshida is traded and that O'Neill does not return.
Yeah, no, it is kind of interesting to see what they're going to do with DH going forward. I think they would like to be able to find someone to take Masataka Yoshida's contract off their hands. There is almost $60 million and 3 years left on that deal. But that's not going to be easy because while he has been a better hitter in the second half, he doesn't supply a lot of power. He's pretty one-dimensional in that he doesn't play the field anymore, or at least the Red Sox aren't comfortable with him playing the field. So you've got a 31-year-old DH who doesn't run well, doesn't have a ton of power, and can't contribute much in the field. As you would expect, there's not a long line forming to go after guys like that. They're going to have to eat a significant amount of that money, maybe half or more, to facilitate a trade for Yoshida. After that, they could target somebody. They could be looking at a right-handed bat. We know how left-handed heavy they are, and that's been an issue this year. But I think it's too early to say what they do at DH. It's not a afterthought for them. It's an important position, but I think figuring out what happens in the middle infield and outfield, as well as improving both the rotation and the bullpen, are priorities before they start looking at DH.
And second base has been a question this year, and David's wondering if there were or what kind of negatives management saw in Nick York since they traded him away, with second base being that black hole.
Yeah, I think some of that goes back to the crowded nature of the middle infield, where there are so many pieces. Whether you talk about Marcelo Meyer, who obviously has had injury issues again this year and didn't finish the season healthy, that's got to be a bit of a concern going forward, but he still factors into that equation. Trevor Storys under contract for several more years. Christian Campbell is a guy who could break through and has played second base and third base along with the outfield. He's in that mix. David Hamilton, who's likely going to miss the final month or so with that broken finger, maybe isn't an everyday player, but he could be a contributor. So I think it was seen as a position that is second base where they had some surplus and where they could afford to move somebody who didn't have much of a path to playing regularly in Boston going forward. York could have been moved to the outfield. We saw him play some outfield at both Portland and Worcester, but it really was a matter of the Red Sox had excess in the middle of the infield. The Pirates had excess starting pitching. They were both looking to solve that surplus, and they traded one another to fill other needs. I think York could end up being a decent major leaguer. I'm not sure that he's an impact guy. And to me, that was a trade that you need to make. If you target a young pitcher that you think has a lot of potential that maybe hasn't been reached, it seems logical to be dealing from a position of strength where the Red Sox stood in the middle infield.
You mentioned Trevor Story that's getting ready to make a return to the lineup, but Scott's wondering if that will still happen regardless of how the team is doing, if they're too far out of the wild card race, if it's even worth trying to activate him.
Yeah, good question, Scott. And I think that Story's play may be somewhat limited going over the final couple of weeks of the season. He is not yet ready to be called up. I would expect that that could happen maybe by the weekend or early next week as the Red Sox return from the road for a homestand. But they may limit how much he plays going forward, not wanting to overdo it. But I think there is some benefit to him coming back, going out, playing in, 8 or 10 games over the final 2 or 3 weeks. And that sends him into the offseason knowing that that shoulder is completely healed, that he can come to spring training and kind of hit the ground running, although they thought that was the case this year too, before he injured that left shoulder a week into the regular season. So you never know. But I think there's some peace of mind that Story can gain or have from getting back on the field and playing at the big league level for the last couple of weeks in September. But I think your thesis is correct that if the games are not terribly meaningful in terms of a playoff push, they're going to be careful and limit how much exposure he gets.
Daryl wants to know that, or he wants to know if you think that if Cora has been a little bit too quick with the hook of his starters this season, and he uses Cooper Criswell on Sunday against Detroit as the example, and if that's a result of managers maybe falling a bit too in love with the advanced metrics.
Yeah, excellent question. That was certainly a controversial move on Cora's part Sunday in Detroit. Criswell started the game, retired the first 12 hitters. Nobody reached base against him. He had not even gone through the lineup twice. That's kind of the bar that a lot of organizations have for young pitchers. They don't want to necessarily have them face the lineup 3 times, feeling that that familiarity eventually catches up with them and that the hitters, having already seen them in 2 plate appearances, might be able to discern some patterns and use that to kind of tee off in their third at bat. So not something that the Red Sox do exclusively. A lot of teams do that, but it did seem like a strange move at the time. Criswell was cruising, hadn't allowed a base runner in 4 innings. I think he had only thrown 50-something pitches, so workload wasn't an issue. But a lot of teams, it's not just the Red Sox, we should point out, a lot of teams get locked into that, okay, he got 12 outs for us. That's important. But now there's a bunch of lefties coming up. We don't want to have him see a guy a third time. So we're going to go to Rich Hill against this pocket of lefties. In this case, it didn't work out. Hill ended up walking a hitter near the bottom of the order and giving up a 2-run homer that was huge at the time. And it kind of took any momentum away from the Red Sox. I would say that Cora does not often seem to be a slave to the analytics or the pre-planning that some teams do, but that certainly seemed to be one of them this past Sunday.
And Bill's wondering that with the Red Sox being where they are at this point in the season, if any of the young guys, assuming the big four, excluding Marcelo Meyer with him being on the injured list, if they're going to be added to the roster for any part of the remaining schedule.
Yeah, that's another good question. And I wonder if being out of the race makes that any more likely. If they were still playing every game with the utmost meaning and trying to make up ground and a realistic chance of getting into the postseason, I would say absolutely no chance of Teal or Campbell or Anthony coming up. I don't think they want to bring anybody up and have them sit on the bench, and they might want to limit how much playing time those guys get in a playoff push. But given that, it looks like they are almost out of contention with the amount of ground they've got to cover and only 23 or so games remaining. I think it becomes at least a little more likely. I don't see it happening with Teal, who has struggled a little bit at Worcester to get his feet underneath him, at least offensively. I know he hit his first AAA home run over the weekend, and that's a good first step. But given the fact that they do have two proven major league catchers ahead of him, there's not really a lot of opportunity for him to play. Now, the outfield's crowded too, and yet I could see Roman Anthony maybe getting a little bit of a look-see down the stretch. Couple of things to think about, though, and factor in. None of these guys is right now on the 40-man roster because they don't have to be. And in fact, they don't have to be this offseason because none of them would be eligible for the Rule 5 draft to a point where the Red Sox would have to protect them by putting them on the 40. So do you want to put those guys, if you were to say, bring up Anthony, do you want to put him on the 40-man before you really need to, just to get him 10 or 20 at bats over the final couple of weeks? I'd say it's a long shot, but if anyone is going to get the looks, I would say it's down to either Campbell, who as a college player has a little bit more experience underneath his belt and is older, or Anthony, who has just dominated at every level this year, and they may want to reward that with a short stint. I still think it's something of a long shot that we're going to see any of the big prospects in the big leagues this year. I think that writing was kind of on the wall when it took so long for them to go to Portland, to Worcester. They want to see those guys dominate at that level before graduating to the big leagues. Anthony is starting to get to that point. Campbell's close too. So long shots both. I don't think we'll see either of them, though.
Charlie's wondering if you think anyone will get rookie of the year votes, and he specifically points to Rafaela and Abreu.
I think they both will get votes. How far up the ladder they finish. It's funny. This was supposed to be a boon year for rookies in the American League. We thought that Holiday in Baltimore, a couple of the guys in Texas were going to be big players. For injuries and performance issues, none of that has taken place. So it's kind of an open field where we're seeing some guys emerge and get consideration who weren't necessarily expected to. Austin Wells, the young catcher with the Yankees, will get some votes. There will be others, but I'm certain that both Rafaela and Abreu will finish in the top 10 in American League, and maybe one or two could finish in the top 5. I would say, though, that it's unlikely either wins the award, but they'll certainly both get support.
And Ralph is curious because over the past few years, the Red Sox have really placed an emphasis on versatility. And if you see any correlation between that approach and their team defense, because he said it seems several games have been lost of errors on plays that are being made by guys who are not playing their usual position.
Yeah, they are trying to get some versatility out of guys and moving people around. You've seen even Connor Wong, the catcher, get a start at first base, a start at second base, moved into the outfield. I think they're trying to take advantage of some of that athleticism and versatility. It seems that the defensive sloppiness happened in the first month of the season, got cleaned up for say May, June, July, and the first part of August, but has reared its head here. Some of that may be guys playing unfamiliar positions. Some of it may be fatigue toward the end of a first long year at the big league level. Not anything that I think you can necessarily say with any certainty about all the players. It's a disturbing trend. It seemed as if it had been fixed and addressed for much of the year, but at a time when they can ill afford any losses, we've seen some defensive miscues come back to bite them over the last couple of weeks. I can tell you that it is not from a lack of effort. We see a lot of infield being taken by the Red Sox, which is not always the case in modern baseball. There is extra work several times a week for guys to work and get better, but they're young players and they're going to make mistakes. They just so happen to have taken place at a time of the year when the Red Sox can least afford them. We are going to wrap it up there. We did not get to every question necessarily, but we do thank those who sent them along. We try to do one of these mailbag episodes every month at least, and we thank people for participating and doing that. We also thank Lauren Campbell for joining us today and reading those questions for us and being part of the podcast. Lauren, thanks so much for stepping in today when we needed you.
Happy to help. Thank you for having me.
And a reminder that if you want to be part of the Insider Text program and be in position to provide questions going forward on future mailbag editions, all you have to do is text the word join to 617-751-6257. Then click the link to subscribe. That will give you a free 14-day trial period. You get to feel it out, see what you've been missing, get updates, get breaking news, get lineups as soon as they're available, the ability to ask us questions, and to submit questions for mailbag episodes just like this one. Chris Cotillo will be back with us next week. We'll have one more episode for you later in the week. We thank you for listening, as always.